The more I hang out with middle schoolers, the more I realize one thing is true. You ask the best questions. Sometimes the questions are simple. Are we there yet? Where's the food? And sometimes the questions are a little bit more difficult to answer. Is God really real? What does it actually mean to follow Jesus? Honestly, that last question is one I've asked myself before. It's one I think most of us have thought about even a time or two. Maybe it's one you've been thinking about today as you showed up here at church. What does it actually mean to follow Jesus? It's a pretty big question, right? And I bet if you asked 10 different people here, you'd get about 10 different answers. To be honest, we all have questions about what it means to follow Jesus. Maybe you think following Jesus is just about following the rules. It's more about what you don't do. You don't go to those bad parties. You don't say those bad words. You don't lie to your parents. You don't date that person who isn't making wise choices. Sometimes it might even feel like following Jesus means you don't get to have a lot of fun, right? Or maybe you hear the phrase following Jesus and you aren't quite sure what it means. Maybe you wonder if following Jesus is the same as choosing to believe in him. If that's you, I'm glad that you're here today for this conversation. I don't know about you, but when I look at all this stuff we think following Jesus is actually about, I find myself asking some other big questions. Like, is this really it? Is following Jesus really just about the songs we listen to, or the church we attend, or the words we don't say? Is this what it's really all about? We're not the only people asking this big question about what it means to follow Jesus. It's actually a question people have been asking for a really long time. In fact, some of the very people to at least think about this question were some of Jesus' closest friends, Jesus' disciples. The word disciple is just a fancy way to say follower. So it makes sense that Jesus' first followers would be the men and women trying to figure out this whole question thing, right? Two of the first people Jesus asked to follow him were fishermen named Peter and Andrew. And we find the start of their journey with Jesus written down in the New Testament of the Bible. And it's in a book called Matthew. And yep, it's written by a guy named Matthew. Matthew was actually a follower of Jesus. He wrote down what he experienced with Jesus so we could see for ourselves what knowing Jesus is like and how it changes everything. So let's take a look at what Matthew had to say. Now, even though this all seems like it happened pretty quickly, both Peter and Andrew had probably heard Jesus teach before. Jesus had been preaching throughout the region, so they'd probably heard the things that he had said. They knew what kind of person he was, but even though they knew Jesus and his reputation, Peter and Andrew still had to be wondering what he meant when he said, "Follow me." During the time of Jesus, the rabbis, who were the religious leaders of the day, had disciples who would literally follow them around. These disciples took every step their rabbi took. If the rabbi went left, so did they. If he stopped suddenly, so did they. So Peter and Andrew would probably have thought at the very least, following Jesus meant walking to the same place or the same direction as him. Following Jesus every step of the way, listening to his every word, seeing how he responded in everyday situations. Jesus was saying, right now, let's go this very moment as you are, where I go. Do the same things I do. Come with me. But the reality is, Jesus meant so much more when he asked Peter and Andrew to follow him. Peter and Andrew were fishermen. They were used to catching fish all day, every day. When Jesus asked them, was an invitation to do something totally different than what they were used to. It might even have been different than what they thought a religious teacher would ask of them. I mean, notice that Jesus didn't say, he didn't say this. He didn't say, get good grades on your religious tests and follow me. Go to the temple more and then follow me. Be good and follow me. Sing more worship songs and follow me. Don't hang out with those people and then come follow me. No, Jesus simply asked Peter and Andrew to follow just as they were so they could walk with Jesus. And immediately they did. I probably would have been like, okay, but can you at least tell me where we're going first, or like show me on Google Maps? But these guys just went. They followed him without thinking twice. Now, spoiler alert, the journey was crazy for these guys. It was crazy for all the men and women who followed Jesus around, and let me give you the highlights. They went on this wild 3-year road trip with Jesus. They saw some crazy stuff, like Jesus walking on water, healing people, and performing miracles. Once Jesus even brought a middle school girl back to life from the dead. This is all true. Jesus, who invited them on this journey, was actually killed. The disciples had to hide to save their lives. And then after that, Jesus came back to life. Jesus sent his disciples on a mission to tell other people about him so that they could follow Jesus too. Nearly every single person that followed Jesus was killed for doing so. All are famous, and thousands of years later, here we are spending time together talking about just one small part of Peter and Andrew's story. So what Jesus meant when he asked Peter and Andrew to follow me was so much bigger than a bunch of rules or reading a Bible every day. What Jesus had in mind for Peter and Andrew and for us was a life bigger and more adventurous and more meaningful and more impactful than what we could ever wish for. Jesus had more in mind for Andrew and Peter and what they would become. Jesus had more in mind for the relationships that they would have. He had more in mind for how much they would matter in this world. In other words, following Jesus changed everything in Andrew and Peter's lives, especially the areas that mattered most. And the same is true for us, because following Jesus isn't about having it all figured out or doing the right things. It's simply about saying yes, to go with Jesus and trusting him to lead you as you go. And when you do, you'll experience knowing Jesus changes everything in your life. I've known this to be true in my own life. And I want you to experience how knowing Jesus will change everything as you follow him too. You can try a few things this week that will help you get started. The first thing we can do is think about it. What do you think it means to follow Jesus? And you need to be honest here. Is it a checklist, a bunch of do's and don'ts, something you're not even sure you believe in? Whatever it is, I want you to consider that there might be more to it. Following Jesus might be bigger than you think, and it might actually change everything you know to be true. You might have a lot of questions about it, and simply taking the step to talk with him about it is going to change something. And second, talk about it. Here's what's cool about this. Jesus is not afraid of your big questions, so be open with him about them. Talk about them, pray about them, share them in your small group at the landing. That's actually why we have small groups there. We want small groups to be a safe place where you can ask questions you have about all this faith stuff together. Because the reality is, we all have questions. None of us have it all figured out, even the adults. So I want to challenge you to share one of your biggest questions with your small group this Thursday. And as you talk about your questions, be open to how Jesus might be asking you to follow him and help you find some answers. Because the truth is that knowing Jesus changes everything. Jesus changed everything for Peter and Andrew. Jesus changed everything for me. Jesus can change everything for you too. And over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be talking about 3 questions Jesus followers were asking back then, and we're still asking today too.